So the presumption is everything that we see today is the way it's always been operating. Uniformitarianism. Of course, the problem with that is every time you look around, if you're of the akin to the uniformitarian evolutionist point of view, you'll find all kinds of anomalies. And you have to explain, oh, well, there it wasn't operating that well. Or we'll have some explanation of some catastrophic event or some unusual thing. But now the exception so often proves to be the rule instead of the other way around. It's not uniformitarian. In any case, because it is known that excess Ar40 is carried from the mantle of the Earth, underneath the surface of the Earth, by plumes of mafic magmas up into the Earth's crust. It is equally likely that much of the excess Ar40 in crustal rocks could be primordial Ar40. Thus, we have no way of knowing if any of the Ar40 measured in crustal rocks has any age significance. Can't trust anything because you weren't there. Additional to the primordial Ar40 from the mantle is Ar40 released from minerals and rocks during diagenesis and metamorphism, so that there is continual migration and circulation of both primordial Ar40, Argon-40, and Ar40 in the crust, which is reflected in their presence in carbon dioxide-rich natural gases. Therefore, when samples of crustal rocks are analyzed for potassium-argon and argon-argon dating, one can never be sure that whatever Argon-40 is in the rocks is from in situ radioactive decay of potassium-40 since their formation, or if some or all of it came from the mantle or from other crustal rocks and minerals. Thus, all potassium-argon and argon-argon dates of crustal rocks are questionable. Not just some, not just many, all. So why even mention this method? As well as fossil dates calibrated by them. So you take a look at how old is this rock. Well, let's date it by the potassium-argon, which is totally method, or argon-argon, which is totally unreliable. And then, well, in these rocks, we don't know if they're this age or that age. So then, how do you know what the fossil ages are? Absolutely you don't. Something that's untrustworthy, that depends upon something else, neither is trustworthy. Yet they continue to put this in the textbooks. We have some references here, written by a number of people. A. Snelling, Institute for Creation Research, Impact. And we have these guys here who wrote in the Geology series and International Geology Review and so on. So we have a cross-referencing of many different sources, from Christian to non-Christian, evolutionists to various kinds of scientific backgrounds. Now, moving on. This is a great article because it provides an expertise across the board. And they all seem to agree on trustworthiness of this method of age dating. Radiocarbon dating method. And this is so misunderstood. Everybody wants to date dinosaurs and all kinds of things. But radiocarbon can only go back about, 14,000, 15,000 years when it reaches saturation, which we haven't reached yet. Radiocarbon dating. Introduction. This tool of radiocarbon dating has become quite widely used and falsely accepted in recent years. It is important to our study since it professes falsely to supply absolute dates for events within the past 30 or 40,000 years. It can't go back that far. This, of course, covers the apparent periods of biblical history, as well as more recent dates, and so it bears directly upon the question of the flood and other related events. The formation of radiocarbon, that is carbon-14, the radioisotope of ordinary carbon, from cosmic radiation. Notice the radioactivity of it comes from external radiation. The question is, if the worldwide flood came from above, especially a super frozen water canopy, then external radiation would be blocked out. Van Allen radiation belt, cosmic rays, and so on. Blocked out, so you wouldn't have that to begin with. Yeah, how many thousands of years do you go with that? You don't know. You weren't there. So cosmic radiation was first discovered, however, by Serge Korff, an authority on cosmic rays. Describing the carbon-14 dating method, which has resulted, Korff says, cosmic ray neutrons produced as secondary particles in the atmosphere by the original radiation are captured by nitrogen nuclei to form the radioactive isotope of carbon, carbon-14, the isotope of mass 14. This isotope has a long half-life, something over 5,500 years. By the application of some very well thought-out techniques, Libby and his colleagues have actually not only identified the radiocarbon in nature, but have also made quantitative estimates thereof. Since the carbon in the atmosphere mostly becomes attached to oxygen to form carbon dioxide, and since the carbon dioxide is ingested by plants and animals, and since it is incorporated in their biological structures thereby, and further, since this process stops at the time of death of the specimen, when the specimen ceases to ingest any further carbon dioxide. The percentage of radiocarbon among the normal carbon atoms in its system can supposedly be used to establish the date at which the specimen stops metabolizing. Sarah J. Korff wrote this in American Scientist, so it's not an unrespected publication, of course. It is presumed that today's rate of absorption of carbon-14 into the atmosphere via cosmic radiation has remained constant throughout the presumed millions of years of the Earth's existence. So a plant, when it was alive, would reflect the proportion of carbon-14 to normative carbon at the particular time of its existence. Later times will have an ever-increasing proportion of carbon-14 as reflected in the dead organic matter of those times. Therefore, the higher the percentage of carbon-14 to normal carbon in the fossil remains will indicate a younger age in which that living matter once lived, according to evolutionists' uniformitarianists. Usually they're one and the same. Well, we have a number of assumptions which have to be made to create a plausible result, but they're largely false. There is no doubt that this carbon dating method constitutes a very ingenious and powerful dating tool, provided only that the inherent assumptions are valid. Colt lists the assumptions as follows. There are two basic assumptions in the carbon-14 method. One is that the carbon-14 concentration in the carbon dioxide cycle is constant. The other is that the cosmic ray flux has been essentially constant, at least on a scale of centuries. And we're talking about millions of years here at stake. So we have a doubt really early on, to which we might add the assumption of the constancy of the rate of decay of the carbon-14 atoms. the assumption that dead organic matter is not later altered with respect to its carbon content by any biologic or other activity, the assumption that the carbon dioxide content of the ocean and atmosphere has been constant with time, the assumption that the huge reservoir of oceanic carbon has not changed in size during the period of applicability of the method, and the assumption that the rate of formation and the rate of decay of radiocarbon atoms have been in equilibrium throughout the period of applicability, which has, by the way, been proven false. Every one of these assumptions is highly questionable in the context of the events of creation and the deluge. But it is falsely maintained by evolutionists that the method has been verified beyond any question by numerous correlations with known dates. Here, an observation by Libby himself is interesting and in point. Libby says, the first shock Dr. Arnold and I had was that our advisors informed us that the history of mankind's civilizations extended back only 5,000 years. We had thought initially that we would be able to get samples all along the curve back to 30,000 years, but the points in, and then our work would be finished. We just put the points in and we're done. You read books and find statements that such and such a society or archaeological site is 20,000 years old. We learned rather abruptly that these numbers, these ancient ages, are not known. In fact, it is about the time of the first dynasty in Egypt that the last historical date of any real certainty has been established. W.F. Libby, Radiocarbon Dating, in American Scientist magazine. It is obvious, therefore, that any genuine correlation of the radiocarbon method with definite historical chronologies is limited only to some time after the flood and dispersion. The major assumptions in the method are evidently valid for this period, but this does not prove their validity for more ancient times, the periods in which we would infer that the assumptions are very likely wrong, and therefore the dating also wrong. Remember, worldwide flood, before that you have a canopy that's protective of external radiation. So what do you get with carbon dating? You get a complete falsity, potentially false result. Attempts to apply the carbon-14 method to earlier datings have, in fact, been called in serious question by evolutionary geologists for entirely different reasons than our own. We have our reasons, Christians, but the geologists also question for their reasons. So why are we using this method at all? But it's in the textbooks. One reason of which is that the carbon dating method conflicts with their own falsely established geological timescale and must be rejected because it refutes their false agenda of evolution, even though they say the method is legitimate. Charles B. Hunt, who is recent president of the American Geological Institute, has cautioned, in order that a technique or a discipline may be useful in scientific work, its limits must be known and understood. But the limits of usefulness of the radiocarbon age determinations are not yet known or understood after all these years. No one seriously proposes that all the determined dates are now without error, but we do not know how many of them are in error. 25, 50, 75%? That's just too many. And we do not know which dates are in error, or by what amounts, or why. I guess we better trash this method as well. Charles B. Hunt, radiocarbon dating in the light of stratigraphy and weathering processes. You got a lot of weather, you got a messed up carbon dating figures. Were you there when all the weather was there? No, you weren't. Hunt emphasizes particularly the danger of contamination of the sample by external sources of carbon, especially in damp locations. Evolutionist and geologist Dr. Ernst Antevs has sharply criticized the radiocarbon method because it contradicts his estimated dates, his own, for the glacial period, which are based on his highly suspect barred clay calculations. But his point